Greetings, everyone. So, moving on with the Crossing the Threshold of Hope book, where John Paul II answers numerous questions, but the ones that I'm going to go through with you are the ones specifically related to other faiths. So, in the first video I made, Pope John Paul II was asked the question, why are there so many religions? And I gave you the answer that he gave as well. You can watch that video. The link should be there right now. And in this one, Pope John Paul II is asked about Buddhism. And I'm going to give you the question and answer that he gave. Before I do that, I want to let you know that there was quite a negative response to what Pope John Paul II said about Buddhism. According to Wikipedia, the Pope's negative portrayal of Buddhism received widespread criticism within the various branches of Buddhism across the world. In response to receiving several letters from Poland from individuals and from a publishing house asking him to comment on it, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, not sure if that's the right pronunciation, one of the key teachers in the Nyingma lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, wrote the book Welcoming Flowers from Across the Cleansed Threshold of Hope, an answer to the Pope's criticism of Buddhism to address the serious, gratuitous misrepresentations of Buddhist doctrine which seem to be based on misunderstandings contained within Crossing the Threshold of Hope. The release of the book in Sri Lanka on the eve of the Pope's January visit to this country stirred up waves of indignation in the Buddhist community that spread as far as the Vatican. The Buddhist prelates announced that they would not attend an interreligious meeting requested by the Pope unless he formally retracted his unfavorable remarks about Buddhism. Although on arrival, the Pope tried to appease the feelings of Buddhist leaders by declaring his esteem for their religion, even quoting the Dhammapada, he fell short of proffering a full apology, and this did not satisfy the Sangha elders. The New York Times cited criticism from Sri Lanka Buddhists, saying, in his book, the Pope uses language that Buddhists here say they found offensive, notably its reference to nirvana as a state of indifference with regard to the world, and its assertion that the Buddhist doctrine of salvation through nirvana is almost exclusively negative. Then Bhikkhu Bodhi, a highly regarded scholar of the Theravada Buddhism and past president of the Buddhist Publication Society, published an essay intended as a short corrective to the Pope's demeaning characterization of Buddhism entitled Toward a Threshold of Understanding. So as you can see, a lot of criticism for what the Pope said, and I'll let you judge for yourselves if you think that the Pope's response to the question on Buddhism and his general views on Buddhism were negative and were not very nice. So here we go. Here's the question to start with from the book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope, a Q&A with John Paul II, basically by explaining in the first video where the Pope is asked, well, I go through the question where the Pope is asked about why there are so many religions. I explain a little bit more about how this book came about. But here is the second video I'm making on this subject. So it's regarding Buddhism and Buddha. Before moving on to monotheism, to the two other religions, Judaism and Islam, which worship one God, I would like to ask you to speak more fully on the subject of Buddhism. Essentially, as you well know, it offers a doctrine of salvation that seems increasingly to fascinate many Westerners as an alternative to Christianity or as a sort of complement to it, at least in terms of certain ascetic and mystical techniques. And here is John Paul II's answer. Yes, you're right, and I am grateful to you for this question. Among the religions mentioned in the council document Nostra Aetate, it is necessary to pay special attention to Buddhism, which from a certain point of view, like Christianity, is a religion of salvation. Nevertheless, it needs to be said right away that the doctrines of salvation in Buddhism and Christianity are opposed. The Dalai Lama, spiritual leader of the Tibetans, is a well-known figure in the West. I have met him a few times. He brings Buddhism to people of the Christian West, stirring up interest both in Buddhist spirituality and in its methods of praying. I also had the chance to meet the Buddhist patriarch in Bangkok, Thailand, and among the monks that surrounded him, there were several, for example, who came from the United States. Today, we are seeing a certain diffusion of Buddhism in the West. The Buddhist doctrine of salvation constitutes the central point, or rather the only point, of this system. Nevertheless, both the Buddhist tradition and the methods deriving from it have an almost exclusively negative soteriology. The enlightenment experienced by Buddha comes down to the conviction that the world is bad, that it is the source of evil and of suffering for man. To liberate oneself from this evil, one must free oneself from this world, necessitating a break with the ties that join us to external reality, ties existing in our human nature, in our psyche, in our bodies. The more we are liberated from these ties, the more we become indifferent to what is in the world, and the more we are freed from suffering, from the evil that has its source in the world. Do we draw near to God in this way? This is not mentioned in the enlightenment conveyed by Buddha. Buddhism is in large measure an atheistic system. We do not free ourselves from evil through the good which comes from God. We liberate ourselves only through detachment from the world, which is bad. The fullness of such a detachment is not union with God, but what is called nirvana, a state of perfect indifference with regard to the world. To save oneself means, above all, to free oneself from evil by becoming indifferent to the world, which is the source of evil. This is the culmination of spiritual process. At various times, attempts to link this method with the Christian mystics have been made, whether it is with those from Northern Europe or the later Spanish mystics. But when St. John of the Cross, in the ascent of Mount Carmel and in the dark night of the soul, speaks of the need for purification, for detachment from the world of the senses, he does not conceive of that detachment as an end in itself. To arrive at what now you do not enjoy, you must go where you do not enjoy. To reach what you do not know, you must go where you do not know. To come into possession of what you do not have, you must go where now you have nothing. That's from the ascent of Mount Carmel. In Eastern Asia, these classic texts of St. John of the Cross have been at times interpreted as a confirmation of Eastern ascetic methods. But this doctor of the Church does not merely propose detachment from the world. He proposes detachment from the world in order to unite oneself to that which is outside of the world. By this, I do not mean nirvana, but a personal God. Union with him comes about not only through purification, but through love. Carmelite mysticism begins at the point where the reflections of Buddha end, together with his instructions for the spiritual life. In the active and passive purification of the human soul, in those specific nights of the senses and the spirit, St. John of the Cross sees above all the preparation necessary for the human soul to be permeated with the living flame of love. And this is also the title of his major work, The Living Flame of Love. Therefore, despite similar aspects, there is a fundamental difference. Christian mysticism, from every period, beginning with the era of the fathers of the Eastern and Western Church, to the great theologians of scholasticism, such as St. Thomas Aquinas, to the Northern European mystics, to the Carmelite mystics, is not born of a purely negative enlightenment. It is not born of an awareness of the evil which exists in man's attachment to the world through the senses, the intellect, and the spirit. Instead, Christian mysticism is born of the revelation of the living God. This God opens himself to union with man, arousing in him the capacity to be united with him, especially by means of the theological virtues, faith, hope, and above all, love. Christian mysticism in every age up to our own, including the mysticism of marvelous men of action like Vincent de Paul, John Bosco, Maximilian Kolbe, has built up and continues to build up Christianity in its most essential elements. It also builds up the church as a community of faith, hope, and charity. It built up civilization, particularly Western civilization, which is marked by a positive approach to the world and which developed thanks to the achievements of science and technology, two branches of knowledge rooted both in the ancient Greek philosophical tradition and in Judeo-Christian revelation. The truth about God, the creator of the world, and about Christ the Redeemer is a powerful force which inspires a positive attitude toward creation and provides a constant impetus to strive for its transformation and perfection. The Second Vatican Council has amply confirmed this truth. To indulge in a negative attitude toward the world in the conviction that it is only a source of suffering for man and that he therefore must break away from it is negative not only because it is unilateral, but also because it is fundamentally contrary to the development of both man himself and the world, which the Creator has given and entrusted to man as his task. We read in Gaudium et Spes, therefore the world which the Council has in mind is the world of men, of the entire human family considered in the context of all realities, the world which is the theatre of human history and which bears the marks of humanity's struggles, its defeats, and its victories, the world which the Christians believe has been created and is sustained by the Creator's love, a world enslaved by sin but liberated by the crucified and resurrected Christ in order to defeat evil, and destined according to the divine plan to be transformed and to reach its fulfillment. That's Gaudium et Spes 2. These words indicate how between Christianity and the religions of the Far East, in particular Buddhism, there is an essentially different way of perceiving the world. For Christians, the world is God's creation, redeemed by Christ. It is in the world that man meets God. Therefore, he does not need to attain such an absolute detachment in order to find himself in the mystery of his deepest self. For Christianity, it does not make sense to speak of the world as a radical evil, since at the beginning of the world we find God the Creator who loves his creation, a God who gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him might not perish but might have eternal life. You might recognize that from John 3:16. For this reason, it is not appropriate to caution those Christians who enthusiastically welcome certain ideas originating in the religious traditions of the Far East. For example, techniques and methods of meditation and aesthetical practice. In some quarters, these have become fashionable and are accepted rather uncritically. First, one should know one's own spiritual heritage well and consider whether it is right to set it aside lightly. Here we need to recall, if only in passing, the brief but important document of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith on certain aspects of Christian meditation. Here we find a clear answer to the question whether and how Christian prayer can be enriched by methods of meditation originating in different religions and cultures. A separate issue is the return of ancient Gnostic ideas under the guise of the so-called New Age. We cannot delude ourselves that this will lead toward a renewal of religion. It is only a new way of practicing Gnosticism, that attitude of the spirit that, in the name of a profound knowledge of God, results in distorting his word and replacing it with purely human words. Gnosticism never completely abandoned the realm of Christianity. Instead, it has always existed side by side with Christianity, sometimes taking the shape of a philosophical movement, but more often assuming the characteristics of a religion or para-religion in the distinct, if not declared, conflict with all that is essentially Christian. So that is John Paul II, St. John Paul II's answer to the question on Buddhism.